Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers. Tonight, we're going to talk about getting quality a seat at the table. We're joined by Chris,
Hello, hello.
Russell,
Hello.
David,
Hiya.
and I'm Simon. Before I hand over to Mr. Banter, just a quick message from our sponsor. nFocus are a UK-based software testing company. They've been supporting businesses for 24 years by providing services that include burst resource, accelerated test automation, performance testing, and fully managed testing services. In 2021, they launched a Test Automation Academy to create amazing testers, and now they've created jobs for 48 people in our industry in just under 3 years. If you want to find out more, check out nfocus.co.uk or email at info@nfocus.co.uk if you want to get in touch. Chris.
Hello, friends. So, we record this on the wonderful world of Zoom. And this is what you might call a social media. Being socially, it's a media. You can pull that face better. So my thoughts were, do you have like memories of early social media? Happy memories, frustrating memories, hours spent just waiting for someone to see you online, or hours spent custom HTML on different pages. What are your early memories of social media?
I used to love MySpace, where in fact you could choose a song that would play every time someone come onto your page.
So loud.
So loud. Ridiculous. And I think the other one was when Facebook first started, it was only for certain universities, and some of my friends had access to Facebook and I didn't, because Hull wasn't on the list, which was quite interesting. But yeah, nothing too exciting, but there we go.
My social media was Friends Reunited. Everyone remember that? So yeah, that was new, because especially for people of my age, meeting up with your old friends, sometimes you realized why you'd lost touch with them in the first place. But sometimes it was actually quite beneficial to meet up with old people, but older friends, I'd say. Yeah, that was my first foray into social media, and it's very quickly died a death once Facebook took over.
Yeah, Facebook kind of solved that problem on top, didn't it? I think for me, it would have to be MySpace. Like, I remember Friends Reunited, I caught up with some friends from that, but MySpace and just being able to kind of, like, I guess, put your persona of your kind of music taste, which is a big part of your identity as a kind of teenager, and put that out there and kind of do something, just create something on the internet that represents you for the first time. It's kind of my memories of it. And God knows what's up there still. I think it still exists, my page somewhere, but never mind. All things on the internet exist forever, don't they say?
Although there was a big purge of MySpace, not on purpose. So a lot of people's MySpaces did end up getting lost, including my fantastic one. I think I had a song by Lit hitting people in the face when they got onto my page. I think Friends Reunited, there was like a paid tier, wasn't there? Like, I refused to do anything on that one, so my profile wasn't very active on that one. I was definitely on Bebo.
I say, do you remember Bebo? I don't remember what Bebo was like, but I remember there being Bebo.
I was told by a girl I'd met that I needed to talk to her on Bebo. But before those times, MSN Messenger, of course, was quite a regular interaction on those things. I remember sitting on my Windows 95 machine, but this is like 2000 or whatever. You could hear the machine cranking as something was about to happen, and then you'd get the notification that you got a message from someone. What exciting times! Couldn't have any of those instant gratification moments on those tools. Yeah, good time. MySpace, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. It's all a bit sort of samey these days, although I did really enjoy Twitter in the time leading up to the pandemic. That was a good time. Now, better we forget it.
I'm trying to get more involved in Blue Sky, but I can't get there. It doesn't quite have that same vibe as Twitter used to have. Twitter now is horrendous, but Twitter used to have a nice vibe. LinkedIn's the place to be, apparently. Anyway, should we move on? So this topic tonight, quality getting a seat at the table, come from a comment from Stephen Platten, one of our PeersCon 25 speakers. on a post about culture of quality. Was it on a test? Chris, you mentioned it earlier. Is it on the Testing Peers LinkedIn page? Is it one of those comments?
No, it was underneath a culture of quality post that I'd done, talking about quality engineering and all that sort of good stuff that we've been doing. And Stephen asked a very pointed and direct question. His question, after talking about it, like my post was largely all about who owns quality, how do we bring it, how do we discuss more in our wider organization. So obviously as testers, we always like to look to pursue these things, but this is like on a broader scale. And his question was, how do you see us making sure that we get our feet, we being testers, software quality, engineering folks, whatever we identify as, how do we make sure that we get our feet at the table? And secondary to that was, how do we get senior stakeholders to take notice? Really a bit to unpack there. I have an answer that I wrote, but I would rather you guys dive in first.
I'll dive in. And it's one of those expressions that means different things in different contexts, and we love context. But kind of being heard, getting a seat at that table, it's first about understanding what table you want to get a seat at. Who do you need to influence? What do you need to influence? And then figuring out a little bit about who you can be your allies, who you can work with, who can you influence, and why. Who's going to hear your message? Who wants to know? Who cares? For want of a better word, who might care? And then how can you sell an idea, a concept, a need to that person or individual? But it can be in your little engineering community. It could be at your CTO community. It depends on your organizations. It can be at your senior leadership, generic, company-wide senior leadership team. It depends what your problem is, really, and why you don't think it's being heard. But it's all fundamentally about trying to understand what's in it for them. I hate to say this, but the majority of people who are senior leaders or otherwise are all interested in about what's in it for me. Why does this matter? And building those alliances, those allegiances, those connections, networking is probably the fundamental way to start that path. And there's lots of techniques to do that, but I'm going to stop there and let my colleagues come in.
Yeah, I think for me the challenge is your senior leadership levels usually, stereotypically, are only interested, like Russell said, what's in it for them, or how do we get things done. They don't care how it's done. It's more about getting the things done in the first place. And the problem with our particular trade is people only hear about it when it goes wrong. If it's done well, then it's not something that gets raised. There's no one praising the testing team for no defects being leaked into production or automation making it quicker. It's all about, it's been done, successful. Let's all celebrate. If it goes wrong, it's the testing team's fault. That's when the CIO or the C-suite would generally want to ask questions. And there is an education piece, and it can be quite a long drawn out process to get those senior leaders on board with us being part of the discussions. And I certainly have experienced in the last year or so of those kind of discussions not involving anyone from a testing stroke QE perspective, and that causing real problems for the teams. So yeah, it is a challenge. Sometimes
you can't influence that CTO directly or the C level, as you say. You've got to influence the people that then influence them.
Exactly that.
It gets a game of chess, doesn't it? Three-dimensional influencing games. You're right. You do need to try and give them value, and that value can be to their bottom line, which could be more customers, higher percentage of click rates or whatever that happens to be, or more sales. It all depends, doesn't it?
I think there's also the question of getting those people at that levels to understand, as we said, what value we were bringing, but also to understand the idea of quality as a concept of what we're adding, rather than testing as a potential cost. Because sometimes if we go too much down the testing route and going, we need test, actually that loses a lot of its general value, because again, we're seen as that cost element, whereas actually we need to be seen to be adding something to the table rather than just be seen as a cost. And I think that whole first conversation of convincing people about quality and having everyone responsibility for quality, but test can help enhance that, is one of the key things I think that I've noticed people struggle with before.
Chris, you said this was on your post about quality engineering. I think quality engineering is a fantastic angle to talk to people about the value of software testing and all the things around it, because it starts to talk about building things to be of quality rather than this old-fashioned, I'm going to call it, concept that you will do all this work and at the end of it, some testers will sit in a room blindfolded, bash their keyboards like lunatics, and then report 1,000 problems. And
Trauma
causes lots of problems,
throwback.
delay it. Yeah, but delay the release, cause all these problems because it wasn't good enough, and therefore these are the problem finders, not necessarily problem solvers. But when you go into that quality engineering conversation, you actually start talking about, well, being a team player. You get away from this throwing over the fence silo mentality. You start talking about building things. You start to basically open ears, for want of a better expression. So people will start listening to a little bit more about what they're going, because they start talking about value comes from that sort of area. And I think that quality engineering movements, articulation, language, it's amazing. Like, we work in testing, the language and words we use. I keep getting told at times, I've forgotten what the expression is, but too pedantic, too particular about words. It's like, words matter. Words, what we interpret, words are really important, and job titles, for the same effect, can have that impact. The language we use, testing, which has got a perception, or quality engineering, which has a different perception. And elements, they're not the same thing. The similarities, but they're not the same thing. But that change of language opens doors. I think Simon talked about this on the previous podcast, and this is also going into memory zone. Wow.
He's got it's new world.
He talked about changing job titles and actually how it changed how people's perception of those people were, and it opened up more avenues for him in where he was working. So it is one of those things that I know that I've been keen on where I worked, is to try and change the title, to try and change the perception, but also change the skills. It's changing a job title isn't the only part. It's not that simplistic, but changing that language to quality engineering, and you start to see people prick their ears up a little bit more, listen a little bit more to the kind of, how do we prevent problems? Because a lot of people like prevention. Not many people like delays after the fact. So anyway.
I was going to say that another thing that you've highlighted, and it's mentioned in Chris's article, is about psychological safety and also the sort of quality conversations. I think that, again, it sort of goes into the message and the way that's messaged. Sometimes I think that testers are seen as sort of troublemakers, or, always whinging. And so therefore, if we don't message it quite rightly, then actually, if we're trying to highlight things to change, they just think that, they're just going off on one. They're just continuing down that critical route. Whereas I think that, as you say, changing that mindset of it's everyone's responsibility, but also being psychologically safe, that you can share any idea and be listened to, is a big change. And I don't necessarily think that all organizations have that option of psychological safety. I know Simon's mentioned psychological safety in some posts recently, and I'm a great advocate for psychological safety. But I don't think, from my experience, we are not there yet.
It's not something you can just turn on, is it? But I was talking about a similar topic with Tara Walton, fellow peer, podcast host and everything, on with us. And she said to me that it's a lot easier to get a seat at the table when you're a bloke as well in many organisations. Let's face it. There is gender privilege. There's other sorts of privileges and stuff, and that is something to be aware of as well when we talk about psychological safety and inclusion in that sort of space. I liked a lot of what you were saying, David, before, and one of the parts that I answered was not only is it about changing the way that I speak and I represent things in terms of the failure to opportunity kind of language, and we're all sort of in this together, but trying to be a bit bolder, be a bit more assertive, and represent myself as a tester, and rather than a tester. But I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to sort of represent opportunity. I used to get really annoyed at a manager who said, I don't want to hear problems, I want to hear solutions. And I appreciate that folks in leadership positions especially can be quite time poor. They need to get succinct and targeted data and messages. And they will appreciate folks who are proactive rather than reactive, because we know that that's a more efficient way to operate. And, testers are very curious individuals, and we do want to break things down and work out how things work and look at opportunities to present things. And this quality engineering mindset that we've been talking about presents an opportunity to not only get buy-in with other folks and model collaboration, but to also present opportunities to optimize throughout an entire life cycle, rather than just the analogy I've been using in my job is the idea of, you can have a shoe that's got a hole in it until your feet get wet, and we could buy some really nice, smart looking laces on them. They might look great top down, but you still got a wet foot when you wear them in the wet.
But you could live in a country that's really dry.
Exactly. Context is everything, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I want to add in there. It's like, on the same point, really, which is, I think it was Stephen that did the talk on stoicism at PeersCon, wasn't it?
Yes.
There's an element of there that I learned a valuable lesson once. I was testing some software. I was in charge of looking after it, the release of it. It was a pile of cack. It was broken. It was dysfunctional. It was causing damage to data. There was things that weren't good. Now, not to everyone. This wasn't catastrophic, but to a reasonably large percentage of people. And we were going to release this software. Now, as a professional tester, how do you imagine I felt? Not happy, I think, is the obvious answer. But I had a conversation with the more senior CTO person at the time, and he basically explained to me, he's like, I get what you're saying. I see all these problems, and I know that it's going to take months to come over some of these and fix them. But actually, for this reason and this reason and this reason, for this business, stocks, shareholder information, market reality, legal deadlines, so on, we're going to have to release it. And at that point, I started to realize that as much as may be passionate about doing something high quality to the whole point of the shoes, isn't the only thing that matters. There are other things that matters, and I'm not the most important person in the room. And I personally, having gone down that path myself, have met many testers that sometimes think quality is the be all and end all. And whilst I would prefer to always release high quality, there are reasons, there are times where decisions have to be made. And if you don't compromise, you lose seats at tables. People don't want you.
You're not suggesting we're not gatekeepers of quality.
Oh, see, I was going to say that let's play catchword bingo and say gatekeepers of quality.
But to some people we are, and we sometimes think that to ourselves. I think that's sometimes we burden ourselves that we're gatekeepers to champion quality.
Yes.
I think, but we're not gatekeepers of quality.
I think this is the important thing, is sometimes from past experience, testers have not given themselves, because some people have banged on, I am the gatekeepers, or we've been given this role of gatekeepers of quality, and we're sort of expected to be in that. So when we aren't that and going, we're advising or we're advocates for quality, then there can be this sort of barrier between what's expected of us and what we actually are. And I think that can also cause tension, because, again, it comes back to communication. It's communication of what the expected behavior is to what the real behavior is, and that comes from the actual company values and the expectation of the company. So unless you know what is expected in terms of quality and testing and everything else, then actually you're almost setting up yourself up to fail, because your message might be very different to the company's or the individual that you're actually talking to.
Yeah, and I think something I learned in my last role, I say now, there is a big difference between, within the QE team, the quality engineering team, the testing team, even as big as the team got, 100+ people, it was an echo chamber. Everyone in quality engineering felt quality engineering was the most important thing. It was misunderstood, whatever else, and we needed to do more, etc., etc. As soon as you spoke outside that, no one knew what QE was. Everyone was like, it's just posh testing, right? It's just another word for testing. It was compared to, well, observability is posh monitoring, quality engineering is posh testing, and it's all this, So straight away, you've got a battle to
I'm just seeing the Eton School of Testing here. Sorry.
Well, exactly that. And it's just you realise that half the battle is educating them on what you're there for. And if you're not getting that right, then why would you have a seat at the table? And a seat at the table is only going to come when they completely get everything that you're doing and why you're there and what value you add. And in a culture where if we need testing done, we just pay for more offshore testers to do it and it's cheap, it doesn't really land itself to quality engineering being part of that big discussion. It's just a thing to get things done quickly when we need to. And that's the challenge.
There's something that you do in consultancy quite a lot, which is like one pages, the lift pitch, those sorts of logic. You build those sort of things out, because if you can't describe it quickly, effectively, the value, you don't get attention, for want of a better word. So you've got to be able to articulate it fast and well, but you also have to be able to then expand and go into detail if needed. And I think there's something that we can learn from that. And actually, we can all prepare a crib sheet, a piece of paper that just describes really the value of what we've got. And it may differ, maybe fundamentally the same thing. What is our sales pitch? What if we want to get a seat at the table? What is the thing we want to be on that table for? Why? What is it we're selling? Conceptual idea, not necessarily a product. And then the other side of it is, doing talks. We've all been speakers. We all talk at different things. Talking to your own teams, talking to outside your test community, your QE community, explaining what you do. It's one of the things that often gets lost in big companies or small companies, because you just assume, or you're just another person. So when there are like learning at work weeks and there are these other events and things that go on, just doing something for people that's interactive, that's a bit of fun, that's quick, short, not too dull, just to explain the benefits, the pros, the cons, keeping it light-hearted a little bit rather than a make everyone fall asleep talk, helps spread the message. And that message gets around. You create more allies again. That means you get more opportunities and so on and so forth. It's a snowball effect. So what did you say in your article, Chris, that we haven't covered?
I say in my article. So one of the things I was quite keen to sort of cover, maybe not just explicitly in this article, because I ended up writing a lot of articles, but one of the key learnings that I've had over time and interacting with folks more who might be considered senior stakeholders or folks who aren't explicitly of a tester leaning is that they do come from that place of testing being a cost or not being very visible. And so a lot of what I seek these days is visibility, tangible outputs, measurability on things, because we can have a wealth of anecdotal improvements. The team are generally happier. We feel like we're doing better, but without data-driven feedback, data-driven decisions can't be made. And that anecdotal decisions, things made on a hunch, things made by our biases, happen all of the time. And because historically as testers, we've come from a place where we always just feel like we've been fighting and scrapping. If we can be that more proactive, if we can come with that information, we've kind of set a baseline and then we've been able to show incremental improvements and changes based on solid data. You can throw away people's biases. I find a lot of people will struggle to change their opinions on things unless they're presented with data, like strong reasons, rationale to change stuff. And while it might feel to us that the cultural impact and the improvements that we're doing are enough, actually to a lot of people that won't be. And ultimately you need to sort of prove yourself sometimes to people because they haven't got time to listen to your convincing soapbox that I sometimes feel that I'm on. And so collecting data, understanding context, and then baselining it to then show the improvements. This is how we're going to improve this. This is how we can show that, on our small iterative bit, we took this, we baselined some data, we made improvements, and this is some data to back that up. Ultimately, having tangible outputs that tell a worthy story, that improves your credibility as well when you're coming to that table, because they want that proactivity. They want people to be a bit more bullish, but they don't want to just hear another person being bullish without being backed up, because they've probably got enough of them already.
Can I ask another question? In your article, you mentioned one of the outputs of this stage, a quality role clarity matrix. Can you explain?
A lot of words, isn't it?
It is. Can you explain
Yeah.
what you mean by that?
I threw a lot of words at it, and so
It sounds very
apologise.
interesting, and that's why I'm asking the question.
So in this particular sort of phase, I've spent a lot of time in my articles about context. You've heard the podcast, you know that I care deeply about context and really appreciating what's gone before, what's going on now, wider constraints, dependencies, how people are influenced by these things, customers, clients, risks, all of that kit and caboodle. And part of the ability for us to be able to actually manifest quality being everyone's responsibility isn't just saying quality is everyone's responsibility and then going, job done. Because ultimately, the problem with that statement that folks have is that they will say, if quality is everyone's responsibility, what does that mean? Surely that therefore means it's no one's responsibility, because it's everyone's responsibility. How are we going to drive positive change on those things? And by having different parts across the organization, I've called it a matrix rather than just a linear racy or whatever you want to do, because a race is not a bad place to start, by the way. I'm not bidding off races all the time. I just think it could be a bit constraining. But there are parts in your end-to-end. Say we're talking design engineering through release engineering. There's parts that all of us will have a particular leaning, a particular area of domain knowledge that's kind of ours, that we're a part of. Maybe your organization has a guild, a community of practice. Maybe you've got folks that have got particular skills in that area or interests in that area. Having a picture of where different folks, different departments, different teams lie across that matrix, it gives you a view of how we can distribute things and where you might have gaps. And understanding gaps is almost as important as understanding your coverage. Maybe they're equally, let's be honest. And that's true of when we're doing test reporting and other sorts of things as well. But in this instance, if we've got an end-to-end life cycle, say you visualize it in a pipeline, a path to life, whatever you do, we can see where we've got bottlenecks, where we've got areas of risk, as we do often when we're assessing things. We can look to then put a path to resolving that problem. Maybe we're overloaded in one area, but more often than not, we'll have a bottleneck and we'll have single points of failure. We all know about the problems with those things. And so by visualizing a lot of these things, it helps, because again, if we're getting buy-in and stakeholders and we're trying to show and back things up with data, a visual representation of these things really helps tell a story much, much quicker than if I was just going to talk step by step through a bunch of stuff. So essentially, that's kind of what I meant by that. It would look different in different organizations, because for different sort of stepping stones that we might need to have. I've been using this whole time an analogy of a patchwork quilt that's held together with a common thread. That's the kind of the imagery I've been using for all of this. And those patchwork quilts will be comprised of different fabrics, because different products, different organizations of different scales and different target customers will have different parts, but there is a common thread of quality throughout all of it. And so I think it's important to sort of try and find that way to visualize it, to get onboarding, and then we can dive deeper in for those more important conversations, improvements and stuff in the future.
There are a couple of things there that I'd like to pick out. I think that you're absolutely right, that if we just bandy around that it's everyone's responsibility, then no one takes overall responsibility, and therefore then it doesn't get done unless there's someone who's advocating quality or driving it forward. The other thing I was going to say was the thing that actually struck me, and maybe there is something out there, is almost like a risk storming card game that's based on quality. Creating quality aspects. I know that that's part of risk storming, but actually basing it on more in terms of quality might be a really interesting way of doing it, because then again, it's almost like the Matrix in that card game, that you can then have the quality aspects that are important to you, but basing it on that, and also having responsibility. Who takes responsibility for those particular quality aspects?
The same with anything, isn't it? I mean, you can do as many workshops as you want until you blue in the face, but if there aren't actually actions that people do, they are basically a waste of time. I was kind of thinking when you were talking about that, the idea with the cards. I mean, we had the pipeline game at PeersCon this year, where Szilad's taken the workshop and overlaid that with the test sphere cards, and having a visual pipeline is a great visualization. But having that visualization of a pipeline does enable you to see where your bottlenecks are, where your overlaps are, your non-optimized areas, and again, that's great. And you can often think about how your software development lifecycle is in a similar pipeline kind of way, because it is that flow of information. Sometimes that will look more DevOpsy, sometimes that will be stuck in more classic bits. There'll be dependencies with third parties here and everywhere, but it's the way of capturing it, and looking at it through a quality lens is, as you say, David, it's a great way of sort of weighting things in terms of risk, in terms of opportunity, areas to optimize and mitigate, and what have you. It is, you're right, it's good, and Baron does listen sometimes, so Baron, if you're listening, new pack. What I would say is that there were loads of different bits about things. A lot of my response that I'd said to Simon was about there's opportunities sometimes when you join up a new project, a new organization, you get one chance to make a first impression, and that's probably even easier than when you have been in a company for a long time. They're two very different contexts. But if you can be that proactive person that can make that strong impression, get those connections early, as you talked about, getting allies and stuff, that's one way of doing it. Of course, if you've come in from an organization, you've probably built up a bit of social capital, maybe a bit of reputation for the work that you've done. If you're in a position where you've started to think about getting quality a seat at a table, perhaps that reputation will help you. Social engineering internally, the non-cyber breach kind, might be quite a good way to operate and to find ways and means. There's a lot of politics in the workplace, but integrity, question asking, classic testing, things that we seek, trusted advisors, they're all good things that would be beneficial at the table. Different organizations have got different people with different anchors, but I think there's real opportunity if we can back ourselves up and ask these questions. And we've all been in different places, but I think have at it, and we'd love to hear how different folks get on with that.
I think, and what you just said leans towards it. Is I think it's about finding those allies at those tables already that can advocate for you and help encourage for that place at the table to be there. And that happens through demonstrating the value that you can bring and bringing them on the journey. And if you can bend one person's ear, then it stands a good chance that you'll be able to find your place along that table.
And that sounds like a perfect point to pivot and say good night. So thank you to listening to us once more, friends. A pleasure as always. Thank you to Chris, David, Simon, and I guess myself in a weird way.
Thanks, Russell.
Glad you all listened. I hope you've had fun. Please check out our future and previous podcasts that are available to download, all good podcast providers. And look out for news on PeersCon 26. Hopefully at some point you'll be hearing more and more about it. If you want to reach out, give us any feedback, you want to ask us a question, you want to suggest topics for us to talk about, feel free to reach out to us at contactus@testingpeers.com. Thank you once again, everyone.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.